This video is brought to you by HelloFresh. What's up, guys? Michael here to talk about our favorite extended universe. Now that we've got a good chunk of Phase 4 material to judge from, something interesting is becoming clear. The new generation of Avengers seems kind of neurotic, insecure, lacking a purpose. So, where we once had Tony Stark and all his naive narcissism try to shape the world to his vision, we've now got Wanda going through a mental breakdown and remaking Suburbia. Steve Rogers had that unassailable golden generation spirit, while Sam Wilson doubts his capability to fit those shoes. And Shang-Chi, arguably the biggest new face of Phase 4 to date, encapsulates the self-doubt even further. So what's going on with the replacement Avengers? Put bluntly, they're basically millennials. Or in Shang-Chi's case, skirting the edge of Gen Z, his parents met in 1996, but still exhibiting major millennial vibes. So why has the MCU suddenly got a bunch of avocado toast aficionados gumming up the works with their anxieties, self-doubt, and bad credit? And more importantly, what does this mean for the MCU as it stands today? Pop your antidepressants and stop looking at houses you can't afford on Zillow as we investigate in this Wisecrack Edition how Marvel nailed millennials. And it goes without saying, but spoilers ahead for the MCU. But before we get into it, I want to give a quick shout out to this week's sponsor, HelloFresh. Now, whether you're going back to school, back to work, or just mourning the end of summer, this can be a busy time of year. And something that's always easy to slack on when you're busy is eating healthy, home-cooked meals. And then when you do that, you end up getting takeout, which is usually expensive and unhealthy. Now, HelloFresh is perfect for those of us with busy lifestyles because it makes it super easy to cook real and delicious meals at home. And we all know there's nothing as comforting as a home-cooked meal after a long day. Now, I'm really into the idea of eating the freshest produce. And with HelloFresh, you're getting your produce delivered when it's at peak freshness, even fresher than what you get at the grocery store. And of course, it's delivered right to your door, which I love because I'm very lazy. And best of all, these meals only take around 30 minutes to cook, or 20 minutes with their quick and easy options. And that's way quicker than most delivery. Now, I think there's something genuinely relaxing about spending time in the kitchen, putting a meal together after a long day of staring at screens. And because I often feel guilty when I throw away unused vegetables or ingredients I forget to use, I love that HelloFresh's pre-portioned ingredients mean there's both less prep and less wasted food. And I always forget to eat leftovers as well when I make too much, so their perfectly portioned meals help me avoid this. So go to HelloFresh.com and use my code Wisecrack14 to get 14 free meals, including shipping. It's the easiest way to make sure you're eating fresh and healthy meals without having to worry about trips to the grocery store. Once again, that's HelloFresh.com, code Wisecrack14 for 14 free meals. Now, back to the show. Let's kick things off by meeting our newest Marvel hero, Shang-Chi. Dude has a college degree, can speak 4 languages, and has a wide range of skills, particularly skills that can inflict bodily harm. That is to say, he's a pretty accomplished guy. But he's also completely weighed down by the trauma of watching his mother die as a child, and the sky-high expectations of his dad that he become the world's best killing machine. As a result, he's seemingly dropped out of the race altogether. He parks rude rich people's cars for a living, lives in a converted basement that still looks like a dorm room, and spends his nights singing drunken karaoke. Come on, bud, do better. This looks like a textbook example of a very real generational experience. As journalist Anne Helen Peterson explains in her book Can't Even: How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation, a lot of millennial kids were raised as mini adults, urged on in an endless pursuit of first chair violin seats or perfect SAT scores. Along the way, they experienced the anxieties and concerns of adults long before they were of legal drinking age. While most of them weren't learning to kill with their bare hands like Shang-Chi, his story still feels analogous to the experience of having a ton of pressure to perform at the highest level from a ridiculously young age. As Peterson writes, this pressure led to millennial burnout, especially when young people realize that the thing you worked so hard for, the thing you sacrificed for and physically suffered for, isn't happiness or passion or freedom. Shang-Chi certainly learns that the hard way, discovering that the life his father planned for him is definitely not what he wants. And Shang-Chi's best friend, Katie, seems to equally be suffering from the millennial blues. Katie graduated with honors from Berkeley, which is no small feat. While a previous generation might have seen this as a guarantee of professional success, Katie spends her time joyriding Lambos and doing drunk karaoke on work nights. She still lives at home, too, and we see firsthand the pressure she's under from her family to achieve more. This is primarily reflective of the Asian American experience, but the broad strokes are also shared by a lot of millennials. This generation, after all, was mostly raised by boomers. These parents were super preoccupied with ensuring that their children achieve or at least maintain middle-class prosperity, primarily through pursuing higher education and high-paying knowledge jobs. What's more, we see that Katie's also under pressure to settle down and start a family, like when her grandma asks Shang-Chi when they're going to get married. He laughs this off, as many a millennial would. Real-life millennials, too, are putting off big life stages like marriage or having kids, primarily because they're too cash-strapped to throw a wedding or pay for organic baby formula. And as hinted at in the film, they're met with disapproval and accusations of immaturity by their elders for making these perfectly reasonable life choices. But despite her less than desirable circumstances, Katie comes across as a chill, fun-loving gal. Yet later on in the film, we get a little more insight. We're paraphrasing, but Katie tells one of the villagers that she keeps trying new things, but gets bored just as she's starting to improve and moves on to something else. She even says that she knows her limits and accordingly doesn't see the need to push herself. If that doesn't sound like a burned out millennial who tried and failed to live up to familial expectations, we don't know what does. In this informative moment, we also learn that despite being academically successful, Katie simply doesn't know what to do with her life. Similarly, Shang-Chi, and having his life's trajectory so stringently defined by his arch-criminal dad, was already ill-equipped to carve his own path once he rejected the life his father wanted for him. And while a certain type of cranky boomer might see them as just entitled slackers without the drive and determination to accomplish anything, her apathy and indecision seems to be a legitimate response to a world without much to offer her. So why all the defeatism? These characters are indicative once again of a real-world generational phenomenon. See, real-life millennials and Gen Zers were hugely affected by the economic devastation of the 2008 Great Recession, which marked a drastic shift in cultural and economic life in America. This shift especially affected millennials, who were raised with the expectations of boomer upward mobility and economic optimism. And then they got thrown into the biggest era of downward mobility and social collapse since the Great Depression. As Annie Lowrey wrote in The Atlantic, millennials got bodied in the downturn. Graduated into the worst jobs market in 80 years. That did not just mean a few years of high unemployment or a couple years living in their parents' basements. It meant a full decade of lost wages. Today, millennials have less wealth, fewer opportunities, and less stability than the generations before them, but are still held to the same expectations and sold the same ideals. And while it might feel like a bit of a leap, we can see a similar cultural shift not just in Shang-Chi, but all across the MCU in the pre- and post-blip world. Before the snap, there was an optimistic sense that no matter what threat emerged, it could be handled by a group of well-intentioned heroes who were willing to fall on the proverbial grenade to save others. After the snap, it was clear that there were levels of cosmic evil at play that made the best of humanity's heroes look like chumps by comparison. If Americans struggled with a sort of collective fear and anxiety after the financial collapse, regular people in the MCU's world had to deal with the trauma of seeing half of the world's population eradicated, only to be magically brought back 5 years later in the blip. It's no wonder that Katie remarks that she doesn't see the point in pursuing anything beyond her current circumstances, because why bother in a world where half the population might suddenly disappear? For folks just trying to survive in the MCU, the snap is like a breaking point between how the world was and how the world is. And that's not unlike the realities young people faced in a post-2008 world. We may not have watched half our loved ones disappear, but we did watch a lot of life opportunities evaporate. And we may not have experienced the literal wrath of an angry god, but we are contending with a reality where power is concentrated in the hands of just a few people, many of whom are giant dicks. So who's to say we've not been living through snaps of our own? We see millennial reactions to the post-snap world across the MCU. Wanda Maximoff has a particularly traumatic response to the snap and its aftermath. having lost the love of her life, Vision. Overcome by this loss, Wanda uses her potent chaos magic to actualize one of the wildest dreams a millennial can have. That's right, homeownership, with a nuclear family in a presumably good school district. She retreats into a fantasy-made reality marked by television references and suburban stability. Here, Wanda can live in a different reality, one that plenty a millennial has imagined. How much better her life would have been if she'd just been born a few decades earlier. This isn't far off from those of us entering adulthood in the 2010s and 2020s. While many boomers and Gen Xers found themselves in stable careers and with mortgages long before they got receding hairlines or two-day hangovers, today's young adults have bounced around between various entry-level jobs, side hustles, and shared apartments well into their 30s. And while 77% of boomers and 67% of Gen Xers became homeowners, recent data shows that only 43% of millennials own homes, and things look equally grim for Gen Zers. Much like Wanda, a lot of young people would need chaos magic to conjure anything resembling that quaint old American dream. And it's not just Wanda struggling to contend with post-blip reality. While Sam Wilson, aka Falcon, might have technically been born in the cultural wasteland of the Gen X era, he is functionally a millennial due to losing years in the blip. And fittingly, he's also been hit with some very post-2008 problems. After the blip and the dissolution of the Stark-funded Avengers, Sam is basically doing TaskRabbit, but for the military, dropping in for random contract jobs. That's not unlike the 40% of millennials who now work freelance, without the benefits or stability of full-time employment. Meanwhile, Sam's family's seafood business, like many small American businesses, is struggling to survive modern economic realities. And in a moment that might be relatable to any millennial brave enough to become an entrepreneur, Sam can't even secure a bank loan to help keep the business afloat. It's hard to imagine Iron Man or Thor ever being bogged down by financial problems at their regional bank. But this makes Sam unfortunately relatable to many post-2008 adults, a generation that has a collective $500 billion in student loan debt alone. But the millennialness of the new MCU goes beyond their material realities. See, millennials are also marked by profound cynicism for and disappointment in the world their parents created. Statistically, millennials are the most disillusioned generation, mistrustful of everything from democracy to politicians to religious leaders. In one poll, millennials were also the generation least proud to be an American. Fittingly, our new Captain America 2 has become disillusioned with his namesake country, realizing, much like many millennials, that a lot of the political narratives he grew up believing in are actually massive piles of bullshit. Through meeting Isaiah Bradley and learning about the racist past of the Super Soldier program, Sam becomes more critical of the nation he once served. It's hard to imagine any previous Captain America having actual beef with America. Similarly, in Black Widow, we meet Yelena Belova, who has learned that the narrative she was fed as a child came from a corrupt system. She clings to her idyllic suburban childhood, despite knowing that it was ultimately hollow, because it's unlikely that she'll ever attain such stability again. Like many millennials without an institution to identify with, Yelena's left rootless and wandering. So maybe it's no surprise that each of these millennial heroes struggles with a common theme of self-doubt and self-discovery. Sam Wilson doesn't think he can live up to his predecessor's example because the world has been telling him that he can't, and also because he doesn't have super soldier serum flowing through his veins. His journey is about reckoning with both the expectations of others and America's messy past to figure out what it means for him to be Captain America. Wanda, having lived through an incredibly unstable life, has the one thing she considered stable taken away, and it breaks her. Her journey is a bit bleaker because she eventually gives up her fantasy to move to the mountains to study dark magic. Sort of like a friend who gives up their dream of fronting a Creedence Clearwater Revival cover band to go manage a hedge fund. Yelena, furious that her life has been built on lies, has to quite literally take on her past to learn that she still has a future worth fighting for, even if she'll never go back to the suburban dream. And in this latest installment, Shang-Chi has left his past as a warrior behind, not even telling Katie of his immense talent. But he doesn't really try to form a new direction for his life, maybe because he doesn't know what else he could be good at. His journey is ultimately to find out how he can use his killer fighting instincts to help the world instead of simply being a murder machine. And even Katie is eventually able to find purpose by shooting arrows into the neck of a giant evil dragon. Of course, it's not as straightforward for those of us who lived through a financial crash rather than a blip, and millennials will likely be struggling with all the problems we've been talking about for a while. And yes, I'm off to drown my feelings in drunk karaoke after this. In this way, though, we can see Shang-Chi and Katie's journey as the ultimate millennial fantasy, and one that seems out of reach to most 20 and 30-somethings. Escaping that deadbeat job to find a world of purpose, meaning, and adventure. A life where you're able to use your skill and passion to do something that feels valuable, like you're making the world a better place. And a world where you're not super annoyed anymore at your boomer parents for, well, everything. Instead, for most of us, it feels like the best we can do is find a job that doesn't make us pray for a real-life Thanos to snap us into oblivion, while providing the time and money to at least drown our misery at tropical happy hour with our friends. So if the first phase of the MCU was still in the spirit of the post-9/11 era, offering hope of a badass American military-industrial complex that could blow the shit out of the bad guys while still looking cool as hell, it seems like Phase 4 might be exploring the end of this era of misguided optimism by telling the stories of millennial characters who are marked by questions and anxieties more than they are by confidence and answers. But what do you guys think? Has Marvel gone to the millennials? And do millennials make better superheroes? Let us know what you think in the comments. Big thanks to our patrons for all your support. Hit that subscribe button with all your millennial angst, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching. Later.